Karen Mitchell stood before her bathroom mirror, carefully applying another coat of her signature red lipstick. At 42, she took pride in maintaining her polished appearance, from her perfectly highlighted blonde hair to her designer outfits. Tonight was supposed to be a casual dinner with her real estate colleagues at Vine and Dine, the upscale wine bar that had recently opened in their affluent suburb. As she adjusted her white blazer and checked her reflection one final time, her phone buzzed with a text from Linda, her fellow agent at Premium Homes Realty. "Don't forget, I can be designated driver tonight." Karen rolled her eyes and typed back quickly. "Thanks, hun, but I'm perfectly capable of handling myself." She had never needed a designated driver before, and she wasn't about to start now. The early evening air was pleasantly warm as Karen pulled her white Range Rover into the wine bar's parking lot. She could already see Linda and 3 other colleagues through the large windows, seated at a round table near the bar. The establishment's soft lighting and modern decor screamed exclusive, just the way Karen liked it. "There's our top seller," Linda called out as Karen approached the table. The other women, Sarah, Monica, and Beth, raised their wine glasses in greeting. Karen slid into her seat, immediately catching the eye of James, their regular server. "The usual, Mrs. Mitchell? We just got in that Californian Cabernet you love," James said with a practiced smile. Karen nodded, pleased that her reputation preceded her. She had always believed that being well known in the community came with certain privileges. As the evening progressed, the conversation flowed as freely as the wine. Karen was on her 3rd glass when they started discussing their recent sales. "You wouldn't believe the couple I dealt with today," she said, gesturing with her glass. "They wanted to lowball the Hendersons' property by nearly $50,000. I shut that down real quick." Linda glanced at Karen's glass as James approached with another refill. "Maybe we should order some food to go with all this wine," she suggested carefully. "I noticed you've been hitting it pretty hard tonight." Karen felt a flash of irritation. "Oh, please, I'm not one of your teenage kids, Linda. I know my limits." She accepted the 4th glass from James with a pointed look at her colleague. "Besides, I've driven home from here plenty of times. Nothing's ever happened." The other women exchanged uncomfortable glances but said nothing. They had all seen this behavior from Karen before, the gradual shift from confident to cocky as the wine took effect. Her voice was getting louder, her gestures more expansive, and her stories more self-aggrandizing. By 10:30 p.m., Karen had polished off her 4th generous glass of wine. The conversation had dwindled, and the other women were gathering their things. "Karen, let me call you an Uber," Monica offered, reaching for her phone. "It's on me." "Don't be ridiculous," Karen said, standing up perhaps a bit too quickly and steadying herself against the table. "I live 15 minutes away, and I got an early showing tomorrow. I need my car." "But Karen," Sarah started. "I said I'm fine," Karen snapped, fishing her car keys from her designer handbag. "I'm not some lightweight who can't handle a few glasses of wine. Do you know how many deals I've closed over drinks? This is basically part of my job." Linda made one last attempt as they walked to the parking lot. "Please, just let one of us drive you home. We can pick up your car tomorrow." Karen was already unlocking her Range Rover, the beep-beep of the alarm cutting through the night air. "You all need to stop being such worrywarts. I'm perfectly fine to drive. Besides, I'm Karen Mitchell. Even if something happened, which it won't, everyone knows me in this town. It would be handled." The confidence in her voice didn't quite match her slightly unsteady walk to the driver's side door. As she climbed into the SUV, she missed her colleagues' concerned expressions in the rearview mirror. The engine purred to life, and Karen adjusted her seat with the practiced movements of someone trying very hard to appear completely in control. As she pulled out of the parking lot, she didn't notice that she'd forgotten to turn on her headlights. Behind her, Linda was already on the phone with her husband, asking him to follow Karen's car home, just in case. But Karen was already merging onto the main road, convinced as always that the rules that applied to everyone else didn't apply to her. She had no way of knowing that this misplaced confidence was about to change her life forever. Karen's Range Rover drifted lazily across the center line of Morton Avenue for the 3rd time in less than a mile. The radio played softly, some pop song she normally would have changed, but her focus was scattered between keeping her eyes on the road and fighting the warm, fuzzy feeling from the wine. Behind her car, at a careful distance, State Trooper Michael Rodriguez watched with growing concern. He had first noticed the white SUV when it took the turn out of the Vine and Dine parking lot without headlights. Now, after following for several minutes, he had observed multiple traffic violations that indicated an impaired driver. Dispatch, Unit 247 here. Following a possible 10 to 55 on Morton Avenue, heading east. White Range Rover, license plate. He calmly reported the details while maintaining his distance. In his 15 years on the force, he had seen this scenario play out hundreds of times. Karen was oblivious to the police presence behind her. In her mind, she was doing an excellent job of driving. The fact that she was going 15 miles under the speed limit seemed, to her wine-addled brain, like a responsible choice. She didn't notice how her slow speed was causing other drivers to brake suddenly and change lanes to get around her. As she approached the highway entrance ramp, Karen fumbled with her phone, trying to change the music. The SUV drifted again, this time onto the shoulder, kicking up gravel. The sound startled her, and she jerked the wheel too hard to the left, overcorrecting. A red Honda Civic in the next lane had to swerve to avoid her, honking loudly. Karen's response was to roll down her window and wave dismissively. "Oh, calm down," she shouted, though the other driver couldn't hear her. Some people are so dramatic. Trooper Rodriguez flipped on his dash cam's audio recording. Subject nearly caused a collision with a red Honda Civic. Speed varying between 35 and 50 in a 55 zone. Constant lane violations observed. The highway entrance ramp curved to the right, a turn that Karen took far too fast despite her overall slow speed. The Range Rover's tires squealed as she cut across 2 lanes of traffic, causing several cars to brake hard. She was completely unaware of the chaos she was creating behind her. "I should call Linda," Karen muttered to herself, reaching for her phone again. "Show her I'm perfectly fine." Her hand knocked the phone into the passenger footwell. As she leaned over to grab it, the SUV drifted across the rumble strips on the shoulder. The vibration and noise startled her again. This time, her overcorrection sent the Range Rover careening across 3 lanes of highway traffic, by some miracle, and the defensive driving of others. She didn't hit anyone, but the near miss finally seemed to penetrate her alcohol-induced confidence. Karen's heart was pounding now. The reality of her situation was starting to break through, but instead of pulling over, she took the next exit. Too fast again, nearly clipping the guardrail. Her hands were shaking on the steering wheel. Trooper Rodriguez had seen enough. He activated his lights just as Karen's SUV fishtailed slightly on the exit ramp. Dispatch, Unit 247, initiating traffic stop on Morton Avenue exit. Requesting backup for suspected DUI. In her rearview mirror, Karen finally noticed the flashing lights. "No, no, no," she whispered, her earlier bravado evaporating. She considered, for a brief moment, trying to make it home. It was only a few more minutes away, but even in her impaired state, she knew she had run out of options. As she pulled over, her movements were jerky and uncoordinated. The SUV ended up half on the shoulder, half on the grass. Karen's hands trembled as she put the vehicle in park. The reality of her situation was crashing down around her, but her mind was still trying to find a way out. "It's fine," she said to herself, checking her makeup in the rearview mirror and fishing her insurance and registration from the glove compartment. "I know people. I'll just explain that I had a long day. Everyone knows me in this town. It'll be fine." But as she watched Trooper Rodriguez approach her window in her side mirror, noting his professional, no-nonsense demeanor, a tiny voice in the back of her mind whispered that this time might be different. This time, her status and connections might not be enough to save her from the consequences of her actions. The trooper's flashlight beam cut through her window, illuminating her flushed face and glassy eyes. Karen Mitchell's night was about to get much, much worse. Officer Sarah Chen took a deep breath as she approached the white Range Rover, her flashlight beam steady. After 12 years on the force, she had developed a sixth sense about these situations. The way the driver had parked, crooked and partially on the grass, already told her plenty. Karen was frantically digging through her designer handbag when the officer reached her window. She had already prepared her strategy: smile, be charming, drop a few names of important people she knew in town. It had worked before in getting her out of speeding tickets. "Good evening, ma'am. I'm Officer Chen with the state police." The officer's tone was professional but firm. license, registration, and insurance, please. Karen's hand shook slightly as she handed over her documents. Officer, there seems to be some mistake. I'm Karen Mitchell. I sell luxury properties with premium homes. I'm sure you've seen my billboards around town. Her words came out slightly slurred, despite her efforts to speak clearly. Officer Chen's face remained neutral as she examined the documents with her flashlight. The smell of alcohol wafting from the vehicle was unmistakable. Ma'am, do you know why I pulled you over tonight? Honestly, no, Karen said, forcing a laugh that came out too loud. I was just heading home from a business dinner. Everything was perfectly fine. She leaned closer to the window, lowering her voice conspiratorially. You know, I actually sold a house to Chief Thompson last year. Lovely man, we should give him a call. Ma'am, I observed your vehicle swerving across multiple lanes. Officer Chen interrupted. You nearly caused several accidents. Have you consumed any alcohol this evening? Karen's friendly demeanor slipped slightly. Just a couple of glasses of wine with dinner. Nothing excessive. I'm perfectly fine to drive. She fumbled in her bag again, pulling out her phone. Look, why don't I call Councilman Weber? He's a good friend of mine, and I'm sure we can sort this out. Step out of the vehicle, please, Officer Chen requested, taking a step back from the window. Excuse me? Karen's voice rose sharply. Do you know who I am? I'm not some common criminal. I demand to speak to your supervisor right now. Ma'am, step out of the vehicle, Officer Chen repeated, her tone leaving no room for argument. This is not a request. Karen's hands gripped the steering wheel tightly. This is ridiculous. I pay your salary with my taxes. I'm calling my lawyer right now. Her fingers struggled to unlock her phone. Officer Chen opened the driver's door. Ma'am, please exit the vehicle immediately, or you will be charged with resisting a law enforcement officer. Realizing she was running out of options, Karen unbuckled her seatbelt, nearly falling as she stepped out of the SUV. Her 4-inch heels didn't help her already unsteady balance. This is harassment, Karen declared loudly, stumbling slightly. I'm going to report you. I'm on the board of the Chamber of Commerce, you know. Officer Chen simply took out her notepad, documenting Karen's slurred speech, unsteady gait, and the strong odor of alcohol. Ma'am, I'm going to conduct a few field sobriety tests. First, I need you to. I refuse, Karen interrupted, pulling out her phone again. I'm calling my husband right now. He's a very important person in this town, and he's good friends with your chief. Ma'am, put the phone down, Officer Chen ordered. Would you prefer to take a breathalyzer test instead? Karen's face flushed red. Absolutely not. I know my rights. This is completely unnecessary. I'm Karen Mitchell. Yes, ma'am, you've mentioned that several times, Officer Chen replied calmly. Please understand that refusing all testing will result in an automatic license suspension. Reality was starting to crash through Karen's alcohol-induced haze. Her voice trembled as she asked, Don't you know who I am? My face is on bus stops all over town. Ma'am, right now you're someone who's suspected of driving under the influence, Officer Chen stated matter-of-factly. Your choice, field sobriety tests or breathalyzer. Either way, we're not making any phone calls until after we complete these tests. Karen's shoulders slumped as she finally realized her usual tactics weren't going to work. Her carefully maintained image of local celebrity and influence was crumbling in the harsh glare of the police cruiser's lights. Fine, she muttered, her voice small. I'll take the breathalyzer. As Officer Chen retrieved the testing equipment from her patrol car, Karen's phone buzzed with a text from Linda. Are you home safe? She couldn't bring herself to respond. Standing on the side of the road, her perfect blowout wilting in the night air, Karen Mitchell was about to learn that some situations couldn't be solved with a smile and a name drop. Officer Chen held the breathalyzer device in her gloved hands, explaining the procedure to Karen with practiced patience. You'll need to blow steadily into the mouthpiece until I tell you to stop. Do you understand? Karen stared at the device as if it were a snake about to bite her. Her makeup, so carefully applied hours earlier, had begun to smear under her eyes. The wine that had made her feel so confident at dinner now churned uncomfortably in her stomach. Can't we just work something out? Karen attempted one last time, her voice barely above a whisper. I could make a donation to the Police Benevolent Fund. Officer Chen's expression remained professionally neutral. Ma'am, are you attempting to bribe a police officer? I strongly advise against continuing that line of conversation. Karen's face flushed deep red. In the flashing lights of the police cruiser, she looked almost feverish. Her hands trembled as she accepted the breathalyzer's disposable mouthpiece. Take a deep breath and blow steadily, Officer Chen instructed. Karen's first attempt was too weak. I can't, she complained, swaying slightly on her heels. I'm having a panic attack. I need to call my husband. Ma'am, delaying the test won't help your situation. The longer we wait, the longer this process will take. Officer Chen's tone remained firm but professional. Let's try again. This time, Karen managed a proper breath. The device beeped, and Officer Chen studied the digital display. Her expression told Karen everything before she even spoke the numbers. .16, Officer Chen announced, recording the number in her report. Karen's designer purse slipped from her shoulder, hitting the pavement. That can't be right, she protested weakly. I only had 4 glasses of wine, over several hours. The machine must be broken. The device was calibrated this morning, ma'am. Officer Chen picked up Karen's purse and placed it on the hood of the Range Rover. .16 is twice the legal limit. Please turn around and place your hands behind your back. The reality of the situation finally hit Karen like a physical blow. No, please, she begged, her voice cracking. I can't be arrested. I have an open house tomorrow morning. I have clients coming in from New York. You have the right to remain silent. Officer Chen began, securing the handcuffs around Karen's wrists. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. As the Miranda rights continued, Karen caught her reflection in her SUV's window. Her red lipstick was smeared slightly, her carefully styled hair disheveled. The image of success and control she had maintained for so long was literally and figuratively in handcuffs. My phone, Karen said suddenly. I need to call someone. Please. You'll have an opportunity to make a phone call once we reach the station, Officer Chen assured her, leading her toward the patrol car. Karen's 4-inch heels clicked unsteadily on the pavement. Each step felt like walking toward her own funeral, the death of her reputation, her carefully curated image, her sense of invulnerability. As Officer Chen helped her into the back seat of the patrol car, Karen caught sight of another vehicle slowing down to watch. To her horror, she recognized Mrs. Peterson, one of her regular clients, behind the wheel. The woman's mouth fell open in recognition before she quickly drove away. By tomorrow morning, everyone will know, Karen thought, fighting back tears as Officer Chen closed the door. The back of the patrol car smelled of industrial cleaner and stale air conditioning. Through the window, she watched Officer Chen speaking with her backup officer about having Karen's Range Rover towed. The vehicle would be impounded, another detail that would be impossible to hide from her social circle. The breathalyzer reading of 16 kept flashing in her mind. She had been so certain she could handle her wine, so confident in her ability to drive home safely. Now those 4 glasses had turned into handcuffs, a mugshot, and what would undoubtedly become the biggest scandal in her social circle since the country club embezzlement case last year. As the patrol car pulled away from the scene, Karen caught one final glimpse of her Range Rover in the rearview mirror. Her personalized license plate, KARDNSDLS, seemed to mock her now. In just a few hours, she had gone from being one of the town's most respected real estate agents to just another drunk driver in the back of a police car. And the night was far from over. The fluorescent lights of the police station booking area buzzed overhead as Karen Mitchell stood against the gray wall, holding her booking number for the camera. The flash went off, capturing what would surely be the worst photo of her life: smeared makeup, disheveled hair, and red-rimmed eyes. Turn to the right, the booking officer instructed mechanically. Another flash. To the left. Flash. Karen's perfectly manicured fingers were pressed into the fingerprint scanner, one by one. The machine beeped with each print, a sound that seemed to echo her mounting humiliation. Her hands were stained black with ink by the time they finished. Remove your jewelry, the female officer instructed. Karen's trembling fingers struggled with her tennis bracelet, a recent anniversary gift from her husband. Her wedding ring followed, then her diamond earrings, and finally her Cartier watch. Each piece clinked as it fell into the plastic property bag. Your shoelaces, too, the officer added. Karen stared at her in disbelief. These are Christian Louboutins, she protested weakly. The officer's expression didn't change. Shoelaces, ma'am. It's standard procedure. As Karen fumbled with the delicate laces, a group of young women were led past the booking area, presumably heading to their own cells. One of them pointed at Karen and whispered to her friends. They giggled, and Karen felt her face burn with shame. The holding cell was worse than anything Karen had imagined. The concrete bench was cold and hard, the small metal toilet in the corner offered no privacy, and the smell was a mixture of disinfectant and something far less pleasant. 2 other women were already there, one sleeping on the bench, the other staring blankly at the wall. Karen perched on the edge of the bench, trying to touch as little as possible. Her phone call to her husband David had been brief and humiliating. His silence after she explained the situation had been worse than any angry reaction. I'll call our lawyer, he had said finally, his voice tight with disappointment. Try to stay calm. This might take a while. Hours passed. The woman who had been sleeping woke up and left, replaced by someone else. Karen's expensive pantsuit was wrinkled. Her stockings had a run, and her head was beginning to pound from dehydration and the aftermath of the wine. Around 3 a.m., her cell phone started buzzing in the property room. Through the small window in the booking area, she could see the screen lighting up repeatedly. News traveled fast in their social circle, even in the middle of the night. By morning, her absence at the office would be noticed. The open house she was supposed to host for the Wellington property would have to be cancelled. Her clients from New York would be arriving at an empty house. Her carefully maintained professional image was unraveling thread by thread. The worst part was the powerlessness. In here, her name meant nothing. Her connections couldn't help her. The officers didn't care about her luxury car or her sales records or her position on various community boards. She was just another drunk driver in a holding cell. Around dawn, a new officer appeared at the cell door. Mitchell, he called out, your lawyer's here. Karen stood up, her legs stiff from sitting on the hard bench. As she walked through the booking area again, she caught sight of herself in a reflection. She barely recognized the disheveled woman staring back at her. Her lawyer, Richard Whitman, waited in the consultation room. His usual confident smile was replaced with a grave expression. Karen, he began, opening his briefcase. We need to talk about damage control. The dashcam footage from your arrest is already being processed. Given your position in the community, this isn't going to stay quiet. Karen's stomach churned. Can't you just make it go away? She asked, her voice small. Richard shook his head slowly. Not this time. The breathalyzer reading was more than twice the legal limit. There were multiple witnesses to your drive-in. Officer Chen's report is extremely detailed. He paused. We need to start thinking about plea options. The word plea hit Karen like a physical blow. This wasn't some minor traffic ticket that could be handled with a phone call. This was real. This was serious. As Richard outlined possible scenarios and consequences, Karen stared at her reflection in the consultation room's window. In the harsh morning light, she could see clearly what everyone else would soon know. Karen Mitchell wasn't above the law after all. Her phone continued to buzz in the property room, but now she was almost grateful she couldn't answer it. The real world was waiting out there, and it was about to become very, very uncomfortable. Karen sat at her kitchen table the next morning, staring at her laptop screen in horror. The local news website's headline seemed to scream at her. Prominent local realtor arrested for DUI. Below it was her booking photo, her mascara-streaked face immortalized for everyone to see. Her phone hadn't stopped ringing since she'd been released on bail. She turned it off after the 10th call from a blocked number, knowing it was probably another reporter. The morning's paper lay untouched on the counter. She couldn't bear to see if her story had made the print edition. The email from her broker at Premium Homes Realty sat open on her screen. In light of recent events, we feel it's best for you to take a temporary leave of absence. The carefully worded message might as well have been a slap in the face. 15 years of being their top seller, and now she was being pushed aside. Her husband David entered the kitchen, his face drawn. The Wellingtons called. They're listing their house with another agent. He poured himself a third cup of coffee, and the Petersons canceled their contract. Karen's hands trembled as she closed her laptop. The Petersons had been loyal clients for years. Mrs. Peterson must have spread the word after seeing her arrest. The thought made her feel physically ill. The doorbell rang. David looked through the peephole and sighed. It's Linda. Karen nodded weakly. Linda had been calling and texting since yesterday. Better to face her now than later. Linda walked in carrying a paper bag from their favorite coffee shop, her face etched with concern. I brought you a vanilla latte, she said softly, setting it on the table. And you should probably see this. She pulled out her phone and opened Facebook. The local community group was filled with discussions about Karen's arrest. Some expressed shock, others shared their own stories of encountering her Range Rover that night. A few defended her, but many more were critical. The Chamber of Commerce is meeting this afternoon, Linda said gently. They're discussing your board position. Karen's eyes filled with tears. She worked so hard to build her reputation in the community, to be seen as successful and respectable. Now it was all crumbling around her. Her lawyer had warned her this would happen. The next few weeks will be rough, he'd said. Stay off social media, don't talk to reporters. And Karen, you might want to consider some form of rehabilitation program. It would look good to the judge. The thought of rehab made her stomach turn. She wasn't an alcoholic. She just made one stupid mistake. But as she scrolled through the comments on the news article, she realized perception was everything in this town. Your friend Sharon from the country club called me, David said, sitting down at the table. She thinks you should step down from the charity gala committee before they ask you to. Karen's hands clenched into fists. She chaired that committee for 5 years. The annual gala was her pride and joy, her chance to showcase her organizational skills and connections. Linda placed a hand on Karen's shoulder. The worst part will blow over, she said softly. But maybe this is a wake-up call. Karen wanted to argue, to defend herself, but the words wouldn't come. The image of Officer Chen's face as she read the breathalyzer results kept flashing through her mind. 0.16, twice the legal limit. Her phone buzzed with a text from her daughter away at college. Mom, it's all over social media here too. What were you thinking? The shame washed over her anew. She'd always lectured her daughter about responsible drinking, about making good choices. Now she'd become a cautionary tale. David cleared his throat. The lawyer says we should focus on damage control. He's working on a plea deal, but... He paused. Karen, there will be consequences. Real ones. We need to be prepared. Karen nodded numbly. Her perfectly curated life was unraveling thread by thread. No more luxury car. No more sold signs in front of million-dollar listings. No more respect from her peers. Linda squeezed her shoulder again. We'll help you through this, she said quietly. But first, you need to accept that you can't charm or buy your way out of it this time. Karen stared at her untouched latte, watching the foam slowly dissolve. She'd spent years building a reputation in this town. Now she was watching it dissolve just as quickly. One headline, one social media post, one canceled contract at a time. And this was only the beginning. The courthouse corridor felt endless as Karen walked beside her attorney, Richard Whitman. Her designer heels, once a symbol of success, clicked softly against the marble floor. Today's outfit, a conservative navy suit, had been carefully chosen to project humility rather than her usual affluence. Remember what we discussed, Richard murmured as they approached the courtroom. No outbursts. No mentions of your community status. Judge Harrison doesn't respond well to privilege. Karen nodded silently. The past 3 weeks had taught her harsh lessons about privilege. Her usual tactics, name-dropping, charm, social connections. Inside the courtroom, Karen's heart sank as she recognized several familiar faces in the gallery. Mrs. Peterson sat near the back, along with 2 other former clients. A young reporter from the local paper sat in the front row, pen poised over his notebook. All rise, the Honorable Judge Sarah Harrison presiding. The judge, a stern-faced woman in her 60s, studied the papers before her. Karen felt herself being assessed, measured, judged. Gone were the days when she was the one doing the judging at charity galas and country club events. Ms. Mitchell, Judge Harrison began, her voice carrying clearly through the courtroom. You're charged with driving under the influence, with an aggravating factor of having a blood alcohol content more than twice the legal limit. How do you plead? Karen's voice trembled slightly. Guilty, Your Honor. Richard had explained the plea deal carefully. By pleading guilty, she would avoid jail time, but the other consequences would be severe. The prosecutor rose to present the terms. The state recommends the following: 1-year license suspension, mandatory alcohol education classes, 200 hours of community service, and $5,000 in fines. Additionally, an ignition interlock device will be required when driving privileges are restored. Karen felt her face flush with shame as the prosecutor detailed her driving behavior that night. Each swerve, each near miss, each moment of arrogant defiance toward Officer Chen was laid bare for the courtroom to hear. Judge Harrison listened intently, occasionally making notes. When the prosecutor finished, she turned her attention back to Karen. Ms. Mitchell, would you like to address the court before sentencing? Karen stood, her prepared statement trembling in her hands. Richard had helped her write it, removing any hints of entitlement or self-justification. Your Honor, she began, her voice unsteady. I stand before you today deeply ashamed of my actions. I endangered not only myself but countless others on the road that night. My behavior was inexcusable. As she read, Karen felt the weight of every word. 3 weeks ago, she would have considered this beneath her dignity. Now she understood dignity had nothing to do with social status. Judge Harrison listened without expression. When Karen finished, the judge adjusted her glasses and leaned forward. Ms. Mitchell, I've reviewed your case carefully. Your blood alcohol level was dangerous. Your behavior toward law enforcement was appalling, and your initial attempts to leverage your social position were deeply troubling. Karen stared at the floor, her cheeks burning. However, the judge continued, you have no prior record, and you've shown genuine remorse. I accept the plea agreement with one addition. You'll also speak at 3 high school assemblies about the dangers of drunk driving. The sentence was handed down formally: license suspension, fines, classes, community service, and the school presentations. Each penalty felt like another brick in the wall between her old life and her new reality. As they left the courtroom, Richard tried to be encouraging. It could have been much worse. No jail time, and in a year, you can apply for license reinstatement. But Karen barely heard him. She was watching Mrs. Peterson whisper to her friends, watching the reporter scribble his notes, watching her carefully constructed world continue to crumble. Outside, Linda waited by her car. She was Karen's designated driver now, a humbling reminder of her new dependence on others. How did it go? Linda asked softly. Karen clutched her purse tightly. I have to speak to high school students. Tell them how I went from being a successful realtor to a drunk driver who nearly killed someone. Her voice cracked. How I thought I was above the law until the law proved me wrong. Linda squeezed her arm gently. Maybe that's not just punishment. Maybe it's a chance to make something good come from all this. As they drove away from the courthouse, Karen watched her reflection in the window. The woman staring back at her wasn't the proud, privileged Karen Mitchell of 3 weeks ago. She was someone else now, someone who was just beginning to understand the true meaning of accountability. 6 months after her arrest, Karen Mitchell stood at a podium in the Riverside High School auditorium, facing a sea of teenage faces. Her hands no longer shook when she gave these speeches. This was her 3rd and final mandatory presentation. Before I begin, she said, her voice clear and steady, I want you to know that I'm not here to make excuses. 6 months ago, I was that person who thought she was too important to get caught, too privileged to face consequences. I was wrong. The students, who had been fidgeting and whispering, grew quiet. They had expected another boring lecture about drunk driving. Instead, they saw a well-dressed woman openly admitting to her mistakes. Karen clicked to the first slide, her booking photo. Several students gasped. She heard a few whispers of recognition. Some had probably seen her real estate signs around town. This is what privilege looks like when it crashes into reality, she continued. I had 4 glasses of wine at an upscale bar. I dismissed my friends' concerns. I thought my status in the community made me untouchable. She clicked through dashcam footage from that night, narrating her erratic driving. The students watched intently as her Range Rover swerved across lanes, nearly causing multiple accidents. I could have killed someone that night, Karen said, her voice catching slightly. Someone's child, someone's parent, someone's friend, all because I thought I was above the law. During the mandatory alcohol education classes, Karen had learned about the psychology of drunk driving, the false confidence, the impaired judgment. But it was during her community service hours, cleaning up roadside memorials for DUI victims, that the real impact had hit her. The hardest part wasn't losing my license, she told the students. It wasn't the fines, the community service, or even losing my job. The hardest part was facing myself in the mirror and recognizing how arrogant I'd been. In the back of the auditorium, Karen spotted Linda, who had become her constant support over the past months. Linda had driven her to court appearances, alcohol education classes, and community service assignments. Their friendship had deepened beyond their previous surface-level relationship. Some of you may know me from my real estate signs, Karen continued. I used to think that mattered, that being known in the community meant being above the law. Now I'm known for something else, and that's okay, because maybe my story will stop someone else from making the same mistake. After her presentation, several students approached to ask questions. One girl shared that her older sister had been hit by a drunk driver last year. Karen listened, her heart heavy with the knowledge that she could have caused similar pain. As the auditorium emptied, Linda walked up to the podium. That was powerful, she said softly. You've come a long way. Karen gathered her materials, reflecting on the changes in her life. She had recently started working again, though at a different real estate agency. Her new business cards were simpler, without the glossy headshot and fancy titles. She had learned to accept rides from others without embarrassment. The Wellington house sold yesterday, Linda mentioned as they walked to her car. Sarah Peterson's team got the listing. 6 months ago, this news would have devastated Karen. Now, she just nodded. Good for them. It's a beautiful property. They drove in comfortable silence for a while. Karen's house arrest ankle monitor had been removed last week, another step toward normalcy. The ignition interlock device waited in her garage, ready to be installed when she regained her license in 6 months. You know, Linda said as they pulled into Karen's driveway, I was terrified that night, watching you drive away from the wine bar. I felt guilty for not doing more to stop you. Karen turned to her friend. You tried. I just wouldn't listen. Maybe that's how it had to happen. Maybe I needed to hit rock bottom to really change. Later that evening, Karen logged into her bank account and made a donation to MAD, Mothers Against Drunk Driving. It wasn't a public donation with press coverage, like her old charity work. It was private, meaningful, and done for the right reasons. Her phone buzzed with a text from one of the students who had attended her presentation. Thank you for being so honest today. I never thought about how one decision could change everything. Karen smiled slightly as she replied. Her life had changed dramatically in 6 months, but not all changes were bad. She had lost her privileged position in society, but she had gained something more valuable: perspective, humility, and genuine connections. The old Karen Mitchell was gone, and she was okay with that.